In today's video, we explore the terrifying line between human familiarity and animal instinct. From a quiet English pasture turned deadly to a South African farm where confidence proved fatal. But first, we begin in Tulsa, where a teenage rancher was gored by the very show bull he raised and adored. It was August 23, 2018. In the dusty heat of the Tulsa State Fairgrounds, where the scent of hay and livestock hung heavy in the August air, 17-year-old Miguel Rivas stood proudly beside his prize Charolais bull. The massive ivory-colored beast, weighing nearly 1,900 pounds, had been Miguel's project for months. He called him Titus. Miguel came from 3 generations of ranchers. Though his father had left the business years ago for construction work, Miguel carried the family tradition with pride. What began as simple chores, mucking stalls and hauling feed, had blossomed into genuine passion. By 16, he was handling bulls, not the bucking rodeo stock, but show bulls valued for their build and temperament. Friends and teachers often described him as intensely focused, sometimes too focused. When something mattered to him, Miguel didn't hesitate. Whether it was a stubborn gate latch or a panicked animal, he had a habit of stepping in before fully assessing the danger. His mother once said he had tunnel vision with a hero complex, a tendency to lock onto the problem in front of him and block everything else out. That same impulse had earned him respect in the show ring, but it also made him reckless in the wrong moment. Titus was a magnificent specimen, a broad-chested Charolais bull with a thick neck and seemingly placid eyes. Miguel had spent countless hours halter training him, walking him before dawn, brushing his coat until it gleamed like polished bone. The bond between them seemed unbreakable. On August 23, 2018, Miguel brought Titus to the fairgrounds with practiced confidence. He unloaded the bull into a temporary aluminum pen beneath a series of loudspeakers used for announcements. The morning passed in routine preparation, bathing, grooming, and chatting with fellow handlers. But something was off. Titus shifted restlessly, muscles twitching beneath his short fur. Miguel had to tug the halter repeatedly just to keep him facing forward. A judge remarked on how calm the bull seemed despite his size. Miguel nodded, but deep down, something didn't feel right. Titus's ears flicked nervously at every sound. His tail swished faster than usual. Miguel gave reassuring pets and massages, but Titus wasn't responding like he used to. Then came the sound that would change everything. A sharp, shrieking squeal from the overhead speaker system. Feedback from a poorly connected microphone pierced the pavilion like a siren, slicing through the layered noise of the fairgrounds. The crowd froze. So did most of the animals. But not Titus. Bulls, especially those of the Charolais breed, are known for their size, strength, and surprising bursts of speed when startled. Though typically selected for their docile temperament in show settings, Charolais bulls can weigh between 1,800 and 2,400 pounds and possess the muscular power to cause catastrophic damage in seconds. A startled bull can reach speeds of up to 25 miles per hour and has a remarkably low flight distance, meaning they may react violently to sudden noises or perceived threats in close quarters. In Miguel's case, the high-pitched audio feedback acted as a trigger, flipping the bull's instinct from calm to panic in a flash, and the lightweight pen offered no meaningful resistance. The bull jerked violently, eyes wide, nostrils flaring. His entire body seemed to coil in a split second, like a spring yanked to its limit. In one powerful surge, the aluminum bars of the pen twisted like tinfoil. The structure collapsed with a deafening clang, and Titus exploded into the open aisle. Miguel didn't think, he reacted. It was the same instinct he'd followed since he was a kid. Fix the problem, stop the danger, take control. He had been the one to calm Titus when a storm rolled in last spring, the one to stand his ground when the bull panicked at the sound of a lawnmower. In his mind, this was just another moment where Titus needed him, and beyond the instinct was guilt. Miguel had trained him, chosen this location, tied him in that flimsy pen. If Titus hurt someone, it would be on him. He believed, truly believed, that his presence could stop it. So as the crowd screamed and scattered, as parents yanked their children behind trailers and handlers dove behind gates, Miguel stepped into the aisle directly into the bull's path. His heart pounded, but his hands were steady. He called out softly, "Titus," just like he had every morning before feeding, his voice cutting through the chaos. He raised his arm, not in fear, but in a signal that the bull had responded to hundreds of times. But Titus didn't see a trainer, he didn't hear a familiar voice. He saw movement, he saw a shape, and his body was still locked in panic. The bull charged. He covered the distance in seconds, hooves thundering against the concrete. Miguel barely had time to flinch. Titus slammed into him at full speed, lifting him off the ground with the blunt force of a freight train. Miguel's body twisted midair and struck the concrete with a sickening crack. He didn't move. Gasps rippled through the onlookers, but it wasn't over. Titus spun back, eyes wild with terror, and gored Miguel in the side. The horn tore into his abdomen, lifting his body like paper. A second toss followed, more violent than the first, flinging Miguel sideways as the bull's hoofs stomped dangerously close to his head. Shouts of "Get back!" and "Grab the gates" echoed across the pavilion as handlers finally managed to redirect Titus toward a closed trainer, using feed buckets and steel panels like shields. Medics arrived within minutes, and though Miguel was barely alive, they worked fast to keep his heart beating. In the ambulance, they pressed hard on the wound to his stomach, gave him fluids, and did everything they could to stop the bleeding. At the hospital, doctors rushed him straight into surgery. His belly was full of blood, and they found a major artery torn, along with damage to his liver and spleen. He had already lost almost half of the blood in his body. The surgical team gave him emergency blood transfusions and tried to stop the bleeding, but his blood pressure kept dropping. Then fluid started building up around his heart, making it harder to pump, something doctors call cardiac tamponade. They opened his chest to relieve the pressure, but the injuries were just too severe. Less than 45 minutes after reaching the hospital, Miguel's heart stopped. The doctors tried everything, chest compressions, electric shock, but he was gone. In the days that followed, grief swept through the Tulsa ranchers' community. Miguel's stall turned into a quiet memorial draped with flowers, ribbons, and handwritten notes. Fellow competitors left behind halters and belt buckles in tribute. The fairground committee launched a full review, and new safety regulations were quickly implemented. Reinforced steel pens became mandatory for large livestock, and aluminum fencing was banned for animals over 1,500 pounds. Leaders spoke of his work ethic, calm leadership, and devotion to his animals. Some said he died doing what he loved. Others whispered that no teenager should ever be that close to a bull. His death sparked real change. Policies were rewritten, safety briefings expanded, and structures rebuilt with risk in mind. But for those who were there that day, for the parents who pulled their children back, for handlers who heard the speaker squeal before the chaos, it's more than policy, because danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it waits, quiet, patient, until the moment it charges. From a young rancher's deadly trust under the Tulsa sun, we now move across the ocean to a quiet English farm, where a lifelong bond with a stubborn ram turns into a brutal attack. It was August 14th, 2020 in the rolling hills of Devon, England. 72-year-old Jack Collins lived his life by the quiet rhythm of habit. The small farm nestled between two sloping pastures had been his entire world, a place where he had raised livestock the old way, by hand and by heart. It began like any other day. Jack rose early, put the kettle on, and pulled on his worn rubber boots before stepping into the morning chill. The farm had once echoed with the voices of his wife and 3 sons, but time had narrowed his world. His children had moved to cities, his wife had passed away 5 winters ago, but Jack remained, bound to the land not by loneliness, but by rhythm. Jack was a man of quiet resolve, shaped by decades of sunrises over pasture fields and the soft rustle of sheep in the early light. Stoic and traditional, he clung to the old ways, not out of stubbornness, but reverence. He hand-fed his animals, repaired fences with weathered fingers, and kept ledgers in a leather notebook long after digital apps became the norm. He was gentle with his flock, particularly the orphaned or injured ones, often speaking to them in soft hues as if they understood. Since Mary's death, it was the animals who filled the silence, and though his sons worried he was becoming too isolated, Jack didn't feel alone. The routines gave him purpose. The land gave him peace. To outsiders, he might have seemed simply an aging farmer tucked away in the folds of the English countryside. But to those who knew him, Jack was the kind of man who didn't just work the land, he belonged to it. Among Jack's animals was a particular Suffolk cross ram, larger than the others with a bristly gray coat and curved horns that arced like question marks. Jack had hand-raised this ram after his mother died during lambing, bottle-feeding it through stormy nights, even allowing it into his house during thunderstorms that spooked the flock. The animal had always been headstrong, testing fences and posturing against other sheep, but Jack had never feared him. He treated the creature more like a stubborn dog than livestock, often talking to it as if it understood every word. But in recent weeks, something had changed. The ram had begun rushing toward him during feeding time, not playfully, but with lowered head and stiff legs. It would stop short, snort, and paw at the ground. Jack dismissed this as seasonal bluster, knowing that rams in autumn tended to get restless during rutting season. Suffolk rams are formidable creatures. A mature male can weigh up to 300 pounds, with powerful neck muscles designed for headbutting during mating season. Their skulls are thick, and their horns add an extra weapon when they feel threatened or challenged. Despite generations of domestication, rams still harbor wild instincts. During breeding season, they can become aggressive toward anything entering their territory, even familiar humans. Farmers are advised never to turn their backs on male sheep, as rams have been known to charge without warning. What might seem like harmless animal behavior can quickly turn deadly when a 300-pound animal slams into a human's spine or skull. On that fateful October morning, Jack moved through his routine with familiar ease. The frost had barely melted off the grass when he unlatched the paddock and stepped into the pasture, feed bucket swinging gently from his hand. The sheep recognized him instantly, bleating and swarming around his boots as he scattered grain along the trough. What Jack failed to notice was the ram watching from the edge of the field, head lowered, hooves still in the cold earth. In one sudden burst, it charged. The first hit came fast and low, slamming into Jack's thigh and knocking him off balance. The bucket flew from his hand as he hit the ground hard. Disoriented, he tried to roll away, but the ram circled and struck again, this time aiming higher. A sickening crack echoed across the field as horn met rib. Jack grunted, twisting toward the wooden gate, but his body was sluggish. The ram attacked again and again, its momentum unbroken. Each charge knocked Jack further from the trough and deeper into the mud. His arms flailed in defense, but the animal was unrelenting, its instincts overriding any memory of gentler days. The attack lasted several minutes. By the time it ended, Jack lay crumpled near the water trough, no longer moving. A neighbor, stopping by later that morning to borrow a tool, spotted the motionless shape from the driveway and immediately called emergency services. It was too late. Jack had suffered multiple broken ribs, a punctured lung, and blunt force trauma to the head. The farm's old CCTV system mounted near the barn for fox deterrence had captured the attack in silent, grainy detail. Investigators who reviewed the footage confirmed that Jack had never raised a hand against the animal. The ram had simply attacked again and again until instinct was satisfied. The footage briefly went public before being pulled at the family's request, but not before raising alarm in the agricultural world. Animal behaviorists reminded the public that domesticated doesn't mean docile, and that the human-animal bond, while powerful, has its limits. At Jack's funeral, his son stood beneath the gray Devon sky looking out over the very field where their father had died. Some in the community called it a tragic accident. Others whispered that Jack had seen the signs and chosen to ignore them. But on a farm, sometimes silence feels safer than change. The quiet fields of Devon still bear the shock of the ram's brutal attack. A trusted creature turned killer in an instant. Yet that violence pales against what unfolded next in the wilds of Africa. An ostrich's lightning strike proved even the most seasoned caretaker is not safe. It was November 27, 2022, a day that began like any other on 64-year-old Marlene Luna's isolated exotic animal farm. But in the scorching heat of South Africa's Free State, where the sun beats down on earth and acacia trees cast thin shadows across the landscape, she would make the fatal decision that would cost her everything. From a young age, Marlene had felt more at ease around animals than people. As a shy child growing up on a citrus farm near Nelspruit, she struggled with schoolyard cliques and crowded rooms, but could spend hours trailing guinea fowl through the brush or nursing an injured jackal pup back to health behind the shed. Her mother, a schoolteacher, worried that she was too soft for the world, while her father simply handed her a feed bucket and said that animals don't lie. That belief shaped her life. In her 20s, she took to dairy cattle, not for their milk, but for their slow, deliberate calm. By her 40s, after raising 2 children and settling on her late husband's land in the Free State, her fascination had evolved into something deeper. She began acquiring animals most people avoided: skittish antelope, wary emus, a trio of temperamental capybaras once rescued from a bankrupt zoo. She liked the challenge, not of taming them, but of earning their trust. When her husband passed 5 years earlier, rather than selling the land, she expanded it, converting the old goat barn into an ostrich shelter and reinforcing enclosures across the property. The farm was her legacy, her solitude, her purpose. Days passed in sun-bleached hours of feeding schedules and maintenance, watching her birds pace with their prehistoric rhythm across the dusty paddocks. Among her flock was one male that stood out, a massive specimen nearly 9 feet tall with coal-black feathers and a neck that flushed crimson during breeding season. Marlene had raised him from a chick, bottle-fed him, trained him by hand. She believed this familiarity would keep her safe. But ostriches are not pets. They're the largest birds on Earth, with adult males weighing over 300 pounds and standing up to 9 feet tall. Despite their inability to fly, ostriches are built for speed and power, capable of sprinting at over 40 miles per hour and covering up to 16 feet in a single stride. Their long, muscular legs are not only adapted for running, but also serve as deadly weapons. Each leg ends in 2 sharp toes, one of which is significantly larger, thicker, and claw-like. This formidable toe can easily disembowel large predators or shatter human bones with a single well-placed strike. In the wild, these birds have been known to fend off lions, and on farms or in captivity, they've caused serious injuries and even deaths when startled or threatened. Though often associated with docile behavior in zoos or ranches, ostriches are highly territorial and can become aggressively defensive, especially during mating season or when protecting their young. November marked the peak of the breeding season, when males become aggressively territorial. Normally, Marlene wore a protective chest guard when entering the breeding paddock, but this wasn't the first time she'd skipped the gear for a quick task. She'd done it before, refilling water, tossing feed, mending a broken latch. Always careful, always lucky. That morning felt no different. She grabbed a metal bucket and slipped inside without her safety gear, assuming she'd be out again in minutes. As she bent down to fix a cracked valve on the trough, the massive male ostrich stood motionless behind her, observing. When one of the hens clucked softly in the corner, something triggered in the male's primitive brain. The attack came without warning. The ostrich surged forward, closing the distance in seconds. Marlene barely had time to turn before the first blow struck her shoulder, sending her spinning into the dirt. Before she could regain her footing, the bird reared again, slamming its powerful leg down on her chest. Bones cracked beneath the impact. Desperately, Marlene rolled to shield her head, but the ostrich was relentless. It stomped, retreated, then lunged again, this time kicking with both legs. One strike landed just below her ribcage, the claw tearing through her abdomen with devastating precision. Her screams never rose above a whisper as dust coated her mouth and the sun blazed overhead. The other ostriches scattered, sensing the frenzy, while the male circled her motionless body, hissing and puffing his feathers. It wasn't until nearly noon, 3 hours after the assault, that a farmhand arrived with a feed delivery. He found the gate ajar, the water bucket overturned, and Marlene lying face down in the paddock. Her shirt was shredded, the dirt beneath her stained a deep, terrible brown. Emergency responders were called after a few minutes, but she was declared dead at the scene. The post-mortem revealed multiple fractures, ribs, collarbone, sternum, along with a collapsed lung and severe internal bleeding. A single laceration from the ostrich's talon had punctured her liver. Farm security cameras confirmed the attack and its cause. The ostrich was euthanized 2 days later, while officials cited the growing need for improved safety protocols on exotic animal farms. She was experienced, she knew the risks. That's what made the tragedy so chilling. How quickly routine had turned into catastrophe. Her sons buried her on the property beneath the shade of the jacaranda tree where she used to drink her morning coffee. Her favorite boots remained by the barn door, the laces still caked with Free State dust. As her blood seeped into the South African dust, across the ocean in a California dairy barn, another seasoned handler would soon learn the hard way that even the gentlest cow can become a killing machine when fear takes over. It was January 12, 2022. In the day's early hours, the Paraiso Valley Dairy in Fresno County, California, became the site of a horrific workplace tragedy. What began as a routine morning for Raul Ortega in one of the region's largest dairy operations would conclude in a terrifying end. Raul was no novice to dairy work. At 28 years old, he had spent over a decade mastering the delicate dance between man and beast in industrial agriculture. Born to field workers in Bakersfield, Raul had earned respect through his tireless work ethic and problem-solving abilities. Though not officially a manager, he was the one who trained newcomers and handled the complex machinery that kept the operation running. The Paraiso Valley Dairy housed nearly 1,800 Holstein cows, each animal passing through the rotary milking system daily in a precisely choreographed routine. Raul understood the subtle language of these massive creatures, how to move among them without triggering alarm, how to anticipate their movements, and how to maintain the calm atmosphere essential to dairy production. At 4:38 a.m., Raul stood inside the holding pen, guiding the first group of 40 cows into position for the morning milking. The air was cold, filled with the familiar scents of hay and manure. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the concrete floor as the massive black and white Holsteins shuffled forward. What happened next would change everything. A newly installed vacuum pump, one that Raoul had flagged just days earlier for making unpredictable high-pitched noises, suddenly emitted a piercing mechanical shriek. It wasn't a slow build or a groan of warning, it was a sharp metallic scream like steel teeth grinding against each other at high speed. The noise tore through the cavernous barn, bouncing off the corrugated metal walls and amplifying into something that sounded like a machine exploding. To human ears, it was unbearable, but to the hypersensitive hearing of the cows, it was a sonic assault. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Holstein dairy cows may appear docile, but these are not small animals. Weighing between 1,200 and 1,500 pounds each, they become lethal when panicked in confined spaces. Their wide-set eyes give them nearly panoramic vision, but at the cost of depth perception, making them prone to sudden reactive movement when startled. Combined with their strong herd instinct, even a few frightened cows can trigger a chain reaction of chaos. In a narrow alley or milking lane, a frightened herd doesn't scatter, it surges. When these animals bolt, their momentum is nearly impossible to stop. The sharp turns and steel gates of a barn become hazards rather than boundaries, and anyone caught in the path, no matter how experienced, is suddenly fighting against thousands of pounds of muscle and confusion. The first row of cows bolted forward. One slipped on the wet concrete and crashed sideways into the metal gating. This triggered a chain reaction as 3 dozen terrified animals surged backward and sideways, creating a chaotic mass of thrashing hooves and massive bodies. Raoul, trapped in the middle of the holding pen, had nowhere to escape. He attempted to reach a side gate, but the space was too tight and the animals too frenzied. As he wedged himself near a feed bin, a cow slammed into him from behind, knocking him onto the concrete floor. What followed was a horrific sequence. A hoof crushing his thigh, another striking his ribs, and then the full weight of a panicked cow dropping onto his body. Raoul's consciousness flickered as hoofs continued to strike around him. The sickening sound of bones breaking mixed with the continued screeching of the malfunctioning pump. By the time co-workers managed to shut down the system and clear the pen, Raoul had suffered catastrophic injuries, a shattered leg, broken ribs, and severe internal bleeding. The paramedics arrived shortly after and worked feverishly for 27 minutes, administering 4 units of blood plasma, performing emergency chest decompression, and attempting 3 rounds of cardiac resuscitation. But the catastrophic internal injuries had already caused irreversible damage to his vital organs. Despite emergency responders' efforts, Raul Ortega was pronounced dead at the scene, his body broken beyond recovery. The investigation confirmed what many had already suspected. The faulty vacuum pump that Raul himself had reported was the trigger for the deadly stampede. The authorities launched a full inspection and had the facility shut down for a year for renovation after seeing other substandard conditions. The accident at Paraiso Valley Dairy is a grim warning. Working with massive animals in tight spaces can turn deadly in seconds. Even skilled workers don't stand a chance when machinery fails and 1,000-pound cows panic. Now, in dairy barns across California's Central Valley, workers move differently, sharper, more cautious. They know even the calmest cow can become dangerous when scared. A broken gate, a sudden noise, and the same animals they milk every day can turn into uncontrollable forces. It's a reminder that no matter how familiar the routine, one wrong moment can change everything. As the echoes of stampeding Holsteins faded in California, the Montana plains would soon bear witness to another brutal truth, where a lone rancher and a restless bison stood poised for a collision of flesh and fury. It was February 17, 2023. Under cover of the Montana sky, a tragedy unfolded that would remind us all of nature's raw, unforgiving power. The wind carved dry lines across the eastern plains as Henry Cale Morgan, age 62, a lifelong rancher, tightened his worn leather gloves and prepared for what would be his final morning at Gray Ridge Ranch. Raising bison wasn't just a job to Henry, it was a calling that ran generations deep. His great-grandfather had worked this same land before the Dust Bowl, and Henry had taken over after his father's stroke in the late 1980s. Where others saw danger, Henry saw nobility. Where others used machines and teams, Henry preferred working alone. Just a man and his animals in silent understanding. Each of his animals had a name, though he rarely spoke them aloud. He knew their patterns, their moods, their limits. The largest of them, a 6-year-old breeding bull weighing close to 2,000 pounds, had been especially difficult in recent months. More aggressive, less predictable. But Henry's confidence never wavered. Spring on Gray Ridge Ranch brought the usual challenges: thawing mud, fence repairs, and the biannual transfer of breeding males. That Monday morning, construction crews were installing hydraulic gates on the east paddock, creating unfamiliar chaos for animals that preferred silence and routine. Henry disliked using trucks for transfers. He preferred walking the bulls along the old spit rail corridor himself, giving them space and a clear route. It had worked dozens of times before. The bull, internally tagged as B-17, had been pacing since dawn. The sound of construction made him uneasy. When Henry entered the pen that morning, radio clipped to his belt, he noticed the twitching ears, the low, chuffing breaths. Still, he proceeded. A worn steel gate creaked open. The bull snorted, hooves cracking frozen dirt beneath him. A full-grown bison can reach impressive speeds of up to 35 miles per hour, a startling feat given their massive size. Adult males can weigh as much as 2,300 pounds and have the ability to accelerate from a standstill to this speed in just 6 seconds. Bisons possess muscular necks that support their enormous heads, which function like battering rams used during mating season headbutting contests to establish dominance and in defense against predators such as wolves, bears, or rival bulls. Their aggression in the wild is swift and decisive, often preceded by warning signals like deep growls and raised tails, and they can leap obstacles up to 6 feet high. Injured or provoked bison do not hesitate to charge, as seen in a Yukon incident where an animal thought to be down suddenly rose and fatally charged a hunter before collapsing. These factors combine to make bison not only symbols of raw power and agility, but also a potent reminder of the dangers they pose when their space is invaded or underestimated. What triggered the next moment remains unclear. Perhaps it was the sudden metallic bang from a dropped tool or a loose piece of tin flapping in the wind. Maybe it was just primal instinct. What is known, confirmed later by the corral's motion-activated camera, is that in less than 2 seconds, the bull wheeled around with terrifying precision. He charged. And Henry turned too late. The bull hit him squarely in the chest, lifting him off the ground and slamming him into the side rail. A crunch of ribs echoed off the metal. He dropped, twisted unnaturally, but the bull wasn't finished. 2 more thrusts of the massive head drove him deeper into the dust and hay. It was all over in under 10 seconds. The construction crew didn't hear the attack through their work noise, but an intern retrieving a toolbox spotted the bull pacing near the bloodied rail just minutes after the fatal charge. At first, he thought the animal had cornered something, maybe a trapped calf or a downed gate. But when he stepped closer, he froze. The shape on the ground wasn't scrap metal or equipment. It was Henry. His limbs were still. One boot half off, his shirt soaked dark with blood and dirt. The intern dropped the toolbox and ran, shouting for help. He sprinted back to the main crew and grabbed the foreman's radio, stammering through the emergency call. Moments later, two of the men cautiously approached the corral's edge. One called Henry's name repeatedly, but there was no movement, no groan, no lift of breath. The bull watched them in eerie silence, still pacing in slow, methodical loops, his heavy sides rising and falling, his eyes unreadable. They didn't dare enter, not without tranquilizers. Sheriff's deputies arrived 30 minutes later, their convoy winding up the gravel road while the crew waited in anxious silence. By then, the bull had grown still, standing alone in the center of the corral, calm again, as if the violence had been erased. Deputies kept their distance, assessing the scene before deciding to sedate the animal from behind the gate using a dart gun. It took 2 hits before the bull wobbled, lowered its head, and finally collapsed on his side with a muffled grunt. Only then did the responders enter. Henry's body was found in a shallow depression near the east rail, his chest crushed, face turned toward the horizon. He was declared dead then and there. The bull was relocated to a secluded, secure pasture away from the main herd and human activity, monitored closely for signs of aggression. Ranch experts believe the attack was triggered by environmental stress rather than the bull's nature. Henry's family and the ranch community held the private memorial at the Gray Ridge homestead, honoring his lifelong dedication to the land and animals. Those who knew him carried his memory in stories passed down around campfires and quiet moments in the fields he loved. Bison are often romanticized in American culture, symbols of wild freedom and ancient strength. But behind those noble silhouettes is raw force that humans can never truly tame. Thanks for watching. If these stories stayed with you, there's another video ready to pull you in on your screen now. Just as eerie, just as unforgettable. Catch you over there.